Thank you so much for the introduction, Alexis, and hello, everyone. I'm excited to see how many different people from all over Missouri or all over the country are here. I got to see the chat a little bit, so it's awesome to see folks everywhere. I'm going to share my screen really quick. Oh, it looks like I'm having a difficulty. It says that the host disabled attendee screen sharing, so I might need to be granted access.
Okay, 1 second.
Okay, I think it's up now. All right. Can you all see my screen okay?
Yes, we can see it. Sorry about that.
No, no worries. All right. I'll go ahead and get my PowerPoint started. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. So, as Alexis said, my name is Aisha Muhammad. I am the Community Conservation Planner with the Missouri Department of Conservation in the St. Louis region. And in this role, I work to provide community resources for quality access to nature. And I also assist with long-term planning and programmatic efforts. I'm also the co-chair of the Small Grants for Greening Lots program within the St. Louis Vacancy Collaborative. You may be thinking, what could conservation possibly have to do with vacancy or even the built environment in general? And so I wanted to pinpoint these connections by first taking a step to look at what our mission is at the Missouri Department of Conservation and just understanding what conservation is from both a holistic and human standpoint. So in general terms, conservation could be defined as using our resources wisely in a way that preserves and protects the natural world. And of course, this is what we strive to do at our agency. We are a fish and wildlife agency focused and dedicated to conservation. And you may have seen this before, you may have not if you're not familiar with us, but our mission is to protect and manage the fish, forest, and wildlife resources of the state, as well as to facilitate and provide an opportunity for all citizens, all constituents, all people within Missouri to use and enjoy these resources. So what that means for us is that conservation is a twofold practice. So we must wisely manage the living resources of the state to benefit both wildlife and people alike. And now, oftentimes in environmental discussions, I find that we proceed in a way that really pits humanity against nature, as if we are not a part of it or some anomaly that's exempt from participating in the natural cycles of nature. And in that way, oftentimes people can kind of justify in their minds why collectively we've maybe not been as responsible with our resources as we should be. But in reality, nature is not something that is separate from us as humans. And we can see this in so many different ways. One of them being how we have related to the earth as a species. So prior, to industrialization, to us being in our really busy hustle and bustle lives, humans from all cultures all across the globe have fostered a relationship with the land, and they intentionally took care of it intentionally and effectively. And even a lot of the indigenous American stewardship practices that were done have been adopted by founding American conservationists. That includes things like controlled burns, as well as different fishing and hunting wildlife management practices. And so I mentioned community conservation earlier, and that's also in my job title. And you may be thinking, what's community conservation and how would it differ from just general or traditional conservation? And community conservation, in my mind, isn't really separate from our typical conservation practices, but it's really just thinking about it in a people-focused and community-centered way. And we're working to connect people with nature and provide conservation services where people live. And this is probably something that a lot of people do as conservationists or as community members who are focused on, providing green space or who are conservation enthusiasts are probably already doing. And when we're thinking about having nature close to home, nature's in our communities, I wanted to highlight the benefits of nature that are in the built environment. Oftentimes we're going out into nature and thinking about how those, times can be really restorative for us. But there's also so many benefits to just having even little spots of green space where you live in your backyard or even looking out the window. A lot of research has backed the fact that being in nature or seeing greenery can lower blood pressure and stress hormone levels. It can also has a correlation to a decrease in crime. And most of that has to do with the fact that people are feeling less stressed. When there's greenery around us, we tend to feel like we can really take on our life problems a little bit more effectively. We tend to feel less overwhelmed and high strung. People's needs feel like they're met more when they're in green spaces. And overall, there's an increase in life satisfaction that people experience when there is nature where they live. There's also a correlation to a healthier lifestyle because if you have green space that you can walk to or be near or walk around with lots of nice canopy cover and trees and things to look at that are natural, it helps you get outside and be more active. And overall, this just increases the appreciation that people have for nature, and it allows us to kind of foster stewardship day to day for the world that we live in. And in my opinion, all of this evidence really does suggest that humans are meant to have green space in and around our communities. We are wired to feel and perform better when we're amongst it, just like everything else. And now this leads us to this understanding of a concept known as One Health. One Health is defined by the World Health Organization as an integrated, unifying approach that aims to sustainably balance and optimize the health of people, animals, and ecosystems. It recognizes that the health of humans, domestic and wild animals, plants, and the wider environment are closely linked and interdependent. And so you can see this chart over here, this Venn diagram, where we're looking at one bubble is humans, one bubble is environmental health, one bubble is animal health, and in the middle intersecting is that One Health mindset. Again, this is a holistic approach to health. It's saying that if the environment is not healthy, we're not healthy without like clean water or clean air. If the animals are not healthy, we are also not healthy, whether that be for consumptive reasons, if we're eating animals, or just for wildlife reasons and ecosystem services that different animals provide. And in this day and age, we're faced with so many complex environmental challenges and crises that it's more important than ever to realize that human stewardship plays a vital role in providing solutions and reaching this kind of One Health vision. Probably thinking, what happened along the way? We had a lot of history as a species of stewarding the land, of living alongside nature, but now there's a lot of disconnect. Many different factors can point to why there's such a fracturing between communities and green spaces. Whether you live in a suburb, a rural area, or a very urban area, something might be getting in the way in our modern life from us really connecting to nature or getting to nature, whether that's time, resources, transportation, money to have a car to drive to a natural space, or even just the built environment itself. It's also important to recognize that maybe some people are not physically able to get to certain places and enjoy nature. And if it's not in their backyard, they might not be experiencing it. And of course, I can't pinpoint exactly what happened somewhere along the way, but we got really into the Industrial Revolution, technological advancement, and just having a fast-paced life in general. But that doesn't mean nature just went away. And so even in our bustling cities and towns, we can begin to reframe the way we think about integrating natural spaces into our built environment. And this would help us provide more benefits to our mental and physical health and important refuge for wildlife. So really thinking about One Health, community conservation are kind of one and the same. And when we're thinking about the differences that different communities experience with environmental quality or having green space close to home, this includes vacancy and places that really have high vacancy rates. There's definitely differences in certain neighborhoods having more green space versus others. And so I wanted to talk about, in addition to all the other factors, something known as redlining that has occurred in America. And this has really created a different sort of fracturing within our country and is important to understand how it's affected environmental stewardship and exposure to green space. So, what is redlining? We're taking a step back all the way to the 1930s. That's almost 100 years ago now, which is wild to think about as we're in 2025. This is something that was created by an entity known as the HOLC, or the Homeowners Loan Corporation, and it was created to encourage homeownership. So the staff members at the HOLC tried to organize local real estate professors and lenders to have kind of designated grades to residential areas, residential neighborhoods that reflected their mortgage security in color-coded maps. So when we were looking at the color-coded maps, which you can see St. Louis on the left, that's where I work out of, and this is kind of the one that I reference a lot, but you can find old redlining maps for all over the country and see these patterns kind of happening nationwide. So the green was considered the best investment, or grade A. Grade B was blue and was considered still desirable. Grade C, or the third grade, was yellow, and it was definitely declining. And then red, which is where the term redlining comes from, was considered a hazardous investment. So these areas that were in green were often given loans to improve home ownership, but then the areas in red were not given loans to own homes, and therefore when you have that, there's different kinds of outcomes in different communities based on home ownership and kind of building that economic resource for the communities. And the supposed goal was to make homes and mortgages more affordable and to spread suburban development. But the result of redlining was not quite that way for each community because they were all graded a little bit differently. So this was actually a bias-based system, and it's actually illegal now, but it still directly influenced which neighborhoods received those loans and could build that economic wealth, not only as families, but as communities. So less ownership leads to less property taxes, which results in less economic resources for a community. So in those neighborhoods rated D that are outlined in red, were considered high risk and therefore often had a decreased value in land. And even though they were not good for homeownership, they were really good for new industries, highways, warehouses, a lot of places that have impervious surfaces, factories, all those sorts of things were thriving in redlined areas. And so the more industrialization we had more pollution and a lack of green space being prioritized. And this is really related to a lot of disinvested communities today. And it's also where we tend to see a lot of vacancy. I'll have a couple more maps in here. I'm a big fan of maps, so I'm highlighting a few maps here of St. Louis, talking about redlining versus vacancy. On your far left, you can see this is 2024 map of vacant properties in St. Louis. So the green is going to be, I'm going to put my cursor over here, hopefully you can see. The green areas include empty lots, and it's highly concentrated in North St. Louis City. And then if we're looking at our current municipal boundaries compared to the redlining here in the middle, you can kind of see that big areas that were redlined still hold a lot of the empty lots and the empty buildings, which are here in the red dots on that leftmost map. And while St. Louis has changed a lot since 1937, it's still interesting to see that there is that correlation between former redlining practices from the HOLC, as well as vacancy and different environmental issues. So getting into the environmental impacts of vacancy, according to the Center for Community Progress, many disinvested neighborhoods across the country share similar characteristics of course, low home ownership rates, substandard rental housing, concentrated poverty, predominantly minority population, and high levels of vacancy and abandonment. They're also experiencing things like the urban heat island effect, higher rates of heat-related illnesses, higher rates of asthma, poor air and water quality, higher rates of flooding, food insecurity, as well as higher exposure to mold and brownfield size. All of these are more likely to be found in places with high vacancy, which is why there is that connection between vacancy and environmental stewardship and creating healthier spaces for conservation practices to be implemented. And so again, here we're looking at that map of the 2024 vacant properties. Most of them are really concentrated in North St. Louis City. And there is also a big cluster down here along the south side of the city where another large area of redlining had occurred in the 1930s. And then when we're looking at this WashU air pollution figure, it's showing different sources of air pollution in blue. These dots here are also really concentrated along North City. Not exclusive to where areas were redlined in South City historically, but that correlation is still very prevalent. And while the reasons for vacancy are unique to each community, a lot of our vacancy stems from large population decline as well as the historic disinvestment. And so what are we going to do about vacancy? How can we tackle this? Whenever we're looking at St. Louis, we have a really unique challenge, or you can also see it as a unique opportunity to tackle vacancy. We are the third highest in the United States for vacant property rates. Don't be fooled by this bronze medal. It's not necessarily a positive thing. I just thought it was a cool graphic that we're number 3 in highest vacant property rates. That also offers us a lot of opportunity to get creative and start working with our communities and different organizations to mitigate vacancy and to transform and revitalize our neighborhoods in a community-centered way. And that's where this collaboration with the Vacancy Collaborative started forming. So the Missouri Department of Conservation doesn't necessarily have the staff focused on vacancy, and we don't focus on vacancy as a whole, but we do want to focus on reducing the amount of, non-conservation practices on areas and integrating conservation into communities. So this partnership was really awesome to have occurred with the Vacancy Collaborative. And if you're unfamiliar with the St. Louis Vacancy Collaborative, they're a nonprofit and they're a coalition of community members, private and nonprofit stakeholders, and city agencies committed to reducing vacant property in St. Louis. They also realize that the issue of vacancy, like many other complex issues that humans face, is interconnected and layered. And so in light of this, they're focusing on managing vacancy across various sectors. And one of those includes greening efforts. And it's always done in a community-centered way. And it's always a really great pleasure to work with the Vacancy Collaborative. They're full of great people who are dedicated to St. Louis and making it a better place to live. And so from this partnership, we created the Small Grants for Greening Vacant Lots program. So this is a small grants where you can receive anywhere from $1,500 to $5,000 to create a vibrant green space, specifically with Missouri native plants on a vacant lot in a community. So anyone who is part of a nonprofit, a neighborhood group, a local organization can apply for this and be eligible, but this does have to be on a new vacant lot project, or maybe there's a previously abandoned project in your community that needs to be revitalized that you can apply for small grants funds for. And I did want to note that the funds are not used to purchase any vacant lots, but instead they're used to purchase native plants, signage, related supplies for installation and maintenance, so on and so forth. And something that's new this year for the program is that we've been able to expand our capacity by having pocket parks join the effort with the St. Louis Vacancy Collaborative on the small grants program. So we're going to be having project teams, integrated expertise from the pocket parks team for this initiative, and we're going to be providing support to grantees throughout the entire process to curate supplies, work on maintenance and implementation assistance. And we'll also work together hands-on with folks who have been awarded the grant to do a placemaking blitz at the end of the program so that we get all of our volunteers together, all of our partners together, and can actually transform the space in a couple of hours and then work to help with continued maintenance. And different from last year when I presented on this, our grant applications are currently open right now. So if you're part of a neighborhood or a community that's dealing with high vacancy and you're interested in applying, the applications are due April 18th, and you can visit stlouisvacancy.com/grantsforgreening.html to learn more. And on there, it has the grant worksheets and the budget template, which would serve as the actual grant application that you could email in. And also it has different resources on there. There's an FAQ sheet that's going to be updated. So if you had any additional questions about the grant itself, you'd be able to look there. There's also a recording of the webinar that really details the grant more in depth than I have here. But I hope to see more people applying. And I think it's really exciting that we're having this opportunity again. And we're really young in the process. It's our second year, but it's awesome to see how we can transform space with this opportunity. Speaking of transforming space, something that we can do whenever we are looking at this opportunity to transform vacant lots is to transform our spaces with native plants to make them beautiful and vibrant and really activate them for communities to use, whether that be for having a place that's peaceful to go and enjoy your time, or having a space that fosters community connections. Maybe there's different programs or community concerts going on in that space, or perhaps there's even yoga or a small like walking activity that you can do throughout that garden, birding, etc. There's a lot of ways that whenever we look at what seems to be an empty space that only has turf grass, and we install conservation best management practices with native trees and plants, that we can provide a lot of community and mental and physical health benefits to people visiting those spaces. And while greening vacant spaces is not going to solve this massive issue of vacancy on its own, because there's also vacant buildings and different things of that nature, it's a great way for community members to begin transforming space and continue bringing the community together for the benefit of all who will visit it. So you're probably thinking, okay, what can I do? I'm a community member, or maybe you're a professional who was working closely with a community and they want to transform a vacant lot. So there's a few different roles that people play, and everyone's going to play a different and important role within what I like to consider a partnership. So based on your proximity to project, you will either be a community member or a community supporter. So if someone is a community member, they are living in that neighborhood. They are, familiar with the issues, the needs, and the desires of what their neighbors want. And oftentimes they are the project creators. They are usually pitching this idea to their neighbors, pitching it to funders, and they may just need additional technical expertise to help bring it together, as well as financial resources. Folks who don't live in the community would be a community supporter or community allies. So these are often maybe professionals who can provide resources and funding, technical experts, or just people who want to lend an additional hand because they also care about the neighborhood. Maybe it's adjacent to the neighborhood they live in, but it also is something that is important to them. Now, it's important to realize that you could potentially be both a community member and a community supporter. There are many people who are master naturalists or master gardeners or engineers who live in the neighborhood that have both community expertise and technical expertise. And you'll have to leverage all of those different pieces of the puzzle to make a project come together. Now, when it comes to, oops, my slide went the wrong way. All right. Now, when it comes to creating a space, a lot of the times you're going to be thinking about what supports are needed to fill in the gaps and make this project happen. And I often like to think of addressing basic needs and minimizing as many barriers as possible when it comes to trying to make a green space. Now, a lot of disinvested communities that are dealing with vacancy, or maybe even disabled community members, or just busy community members, may not have conservation on the top of their priority list, especially if maybe they work multiple jobs, maybe they have kids, maybe they just have extracurriculars and other priorities. So when you're thinking about, having conservation implemented into your community, you're wanting to think about the supports that the community needs, understanding the challenges that they may be facing, and try and integrate those resources into your program, into your project, even if it's just creating an awareness of a different service available to the community. So for example, let's say you're owning a vacant lot in a community that deals with food access issues or food security. Perhaps there's not a grocery store nearby, but you guys are really focused on creating community gardens. A way to revitalize and add to that space could be suggesting pollinator plantings. Going around and talking to your neighbors about how this can be helpful for increasing your crop yield in your community gardens with your fruits and vegetables, and also introducing some native edible trees and shrubs to really bring together that whole one health piece for the people's physical health, to have some more nutrient dense native foods, as well as the health for having forage and shelter for our wildlife friends. Perhaps the neighborhood may need more tree canopy cover or needs for tree maintenance. If you're dealing with a really hot neighborhood that deals with a lot of flooding, maybe having some native trees implemented into the project, working with some partners to learn how to maintain that well would be beneficial. It'll help cool the temperatures, reducing that urban heat island effect that's often experienced where there's a lot of impervious surfaces, and also helping to reduce flooding, which is also something that a lot of communities dealing with vacancy deal with. And then overall, maybe thinking about this is just helping to slowly remove the time barriers it takes for people to access nature close to home. Whenever you are building a community green space, this is going to decrease the time it takes for people to get there. It may be in their own backyard, or maybe adjacent to their house, or right around the corner. That's definitely a big step and transformative way to get to nature versus, having to drive so many minutes or so many hours to the nearest green space, right? Now, when it comes to planning and design of your space, it's important to think about the needs of the community yet again, as I mentioned in the previous slide, and also thinking about the maintenance capacity. Oftentimes, we have these great large ideas about the kind of space we want to create in a community. Everyone's on board. Maybe you have a group of neighbors who are thinking big about a huge species selection of native plants. But I think it's really important to always create your plan with maintenance capacity in mind first. So let's say you have 3 neighbors who are dedicated to this effort. Maybe you don't need 20 different native plants to start with. Maybe you just need 5 to 10, or native plants that are pretty hardy and easy to work with as you learn to build those skills over time and curate more capacity and more support and dedication from neighbors. And starting off with less can lead to that sustainable impact. It's really important that whenever we are revitalizing space, whenever we are transforming vacancy into green space, that we have a resilient plan in place. You don't want to see a project start off with this really big sort of footprint that's not able to be maintained long term. And with that, there's also the option to implement in phases. You can always think about phase 1 being 5 to 10 different native plants. Maybe it's a big rain garden, then you have like some mowed paths in the area and benches for people to, mosey through, enjoy the space. Maybe there's some interpretive signage there in another phase. And maybe in another phase, you have like a big stage somewhere on the lot that people can have community events on, whether that's like concerts or movie nights or just different performances. And of course, always thinking about sustaining and building capacity will be key to making sure its long-lasting impact isn't for naught. And then making sure your design meets the community needs when you're coming into contact with neighbors. See what they actually want. Are neighbors interested in just having, pollinator planting, seeing more birds and butterflies? Are they wanting to have a space where they can sit down and kind of rest and decompress from their day? Or are they wanting to get more active? Would they like mowed paths for walking? Do they want educational signage? Do they want to see a combination of these things? Perhaps they want a rain garden to help with flooding events that are happening in adjacent areas to the lot. The needs and could be possibly endless, and the desires that people have are endless. So I think it's really important to consider all of those in your plan and design. And this brings me to one of my favorite topics, and I'm sure it's a lot of your favorite topics as well, considering we're at the Partners for Native Landscaping series, but that's native plants. And I'm sure many of you have seen this image before, but if not, this is an image where we're looking at the root systems of non-native plants to native plant root systems. I remember when I saw this image the first time a few years ago, my mind was absolutely blown because there's just a significant difference in what's going on underneath the soil with native plants versus non-native plants. Like if we're looking at just kind of turf grass, it's maybe an inch of roots, but if you're looking at the black-eyed Susan, those roots can go closer to 7 feet deep, and that can help with mitigating a lot of environmental issues that communities may be facing and may want to implement those kind of characteristics into their project. So I think spreading this information far and wide is super important for getting buy-in for your project and for kind of curating it to what the community wants and needs. And on that topic of what native plants can do, they are amazing. They're incredible. I feel like they're the superstars of wherever you live, wherever they've been adapted to. They have been here for thousands of years and they support the ecosystem a lot better compared to non-native plants. They are co-evolved with different pollinators and wildlife and insects that can find their forage better and thrive better with their resources versus a non-native one. And because of their roots, they're going to promote stormwater infiltration, soil stabilization, and cleaner water, which is great for everybody. They also provide vital habitat and forage for many pollinators and animals and people, if you're into foraging. And an interesting fact from the University of Minnesota was that 1 acre of prairie plantings can store 1 ton of carbon in their roots in the soil per year. So there's a powerhouse of things that we can benefit from with native plants that fit into community conservation and One Health. When you're thinking about selecting some plants for your project, I want you guys to keep in mind that it's important to have both keystone plant species and specialist forage whenever possible. So an example of a keystone species would be a native plant that supports a variety of wildlife and is an important part of their life cycles. So this would be things in the quercus family like oak trees. If you were familiar with Doug Tallamy, he talks about oaks as a keystone species and how they help support so many different insects and birds and wildlife all around. And then also having specialist forage. These are plants that can only or they're plants that are usually foraged on by specialist pollinators. They can only support their life cycle or feed from one kind of plant or one kind of group of plants. A common example of this would be milkweeds when it comes to supporting the life cycle of monarch butterflies. Without milkweeds, there's no monarchs. So thinking about having a mix of these, regardless of what kind of planting plan or design you decide to do within your garden, will make a big impact for supporting that wildlife aspect of your community conservation project. There's a few natives that I like to consider that I wanted to just kind of throw out there with a few pictures to think about and just showing the beautiful variety of native plants that we have. There's truly so many. I would say you can create just as beautiful of a native plant garden as you can with ornamental plants. You can also have, a transitional kind of period between having or converting a space from ornamental to natives. Even just a majority, like 70% of natives, can make a huge difference. So I mentioned milkweeds, how those are great for monarchs, and they vary in sizes. Thinking about the height at maturity that plants will have is also going to be really important when you are creating a plan and offering ideas to neighbors, to the project members for the design. Let's say people don't want really tall plants for potential safety reasons. Maybe they, deal with illegal dumping, and they don't want people to hide things behind certain plants. You might want to go with a shorter milkweed like the butterfly milkweed versus the common milkweed. can also use sedges. I pictured palm sedge here. Sedges are really beautiful. People kind of think they are grass, but they are different than grasses. You can use these as awesome design features. Maybe along a mowed path, you have sedges, or around your community project, around your vacant lot, you have sedges to kind of distinguish where it starts and stops. Maybe have some signage there and mowed paths that can create a really beautiful design and dynamic and kind of help you direct traffic. And then this is just another one that I thought was a lovely plant. This one doesn't get higher than 2 feet. It's bee balm. It looks really similar to wild bergamot and it smells amazing and supports a ton of bumblebees. Now, in regards to trees, I'm going to mention that oak again, anything in the quercus family is a great keystone species to consider if you have the space for it. They do get pretty tall. At maturity, these guys can get up to 50 feet tall. So if you have a smaller lot that has power lines above it, that might not be the best option, but I think it is so worth it to have an oak there if you are able to. And then in the terms of having some shorter native plants or native trees to consider, you could do like dogwood or serviceberry or redbud. I pictured serviceberry and redbud here because there's also some edible aspects to them. So you can create a delicious serviceberry jam or eat them, and that can be a really appealing thing for community members who could have more buy-in to the project if they realize, oh, you can actually like eat and get nourishment from these native plants, and we can integrate them into our garden or our green spaces. And it just makes it a lot of fun for education and for activating community space. They're also delicious. And then redbuds are also edible. You can eat the petals from those, sprinkle them in salads, different things like that. And they're going to provide nectar for bees, seeds, and cover for birds. And they don't get over 20 feet tall. Last natives to consider. These are just some of my personal favorites. I think they are beautiful, and some of these, specifically the aromatic aster, bloom in the fall. So thinking about seasonal interest when it comes to having your native plants, having things that perhaps bloom in the spring, summer, and fall, but also when they're in the winter, they provide some seasonal interest to the space, is a great thing to consider when it comes to designing it. That way people can enjoy it year-round in different ways. So aromatic aster is beautiful. It attracts falls and bees, and it also provides some winter forage for birds. If you're wanting to attract some ruby-throated hummingbirds, those kind of tubular native plants like wild columbine or even cardinal flower, those are great for hummingbirds. I love these because they don't get super tall, but they kind of look like the little fairy hats. I think they're a great addition to any garden. And then one of my personal favorites is Rudbeckia fulgia, or the orange coneflower. These attract bees, butterflies, moths. They're really nice in rain gardens, even as a ground cover. They don't get terribly tall, only about 2 feet. But those roots go really deep. They provide a lot of great ecosystem services, and you will definitely see some insects of all walks of life coming around to enjoy them. I even saw a hummingbird once try and come up to them and realized they couldn't really forage from it with their long beaks and flew away. But it just goes to show that even if you have a few native plant species, even like 5 to 10 to start off on your space that do well together, that are hardier and easier to maintain, you can make a huge difference in the way a space looks and feels and the way that they can provide services for wildlife. And thus, the way those wildlife and ecosystem services can benefit us and our communities as well. So there's a lot that's been going on, a lot of information that I've thrown at you guys, and you're probably thinking, where do I start? There's so much that I need to consider. And I would love to recommend Missouri Grow Native. I utilize them all the time. They have amazing resources on their website. They have a resource guide. I believe the 2025 resource guide is coming out. I don't have that pictured, but I believe we should be able to get our hands on those pretty shortly, if not already. They have resources on, the top 10 plants for a shady area. They have different resources on plants that would support bees in the spring, summer, and fall. Those top 10 lists are a go-to for me, and they also help inform your designs. And speaking of designs, they also just have pre-made designs that you can look at. So here we have a rain garden design to help with, maybe those wetter spots that retain a lot of water that you want to mitigate on your vacant lot. And they also have the butterfly garden design, which has a lot of things going on here. There's a lot of different species that we can see that are planted within this space, and they tell you, the species by its common name, its Latin name, so you can really make sure you're getting the right one for the right space whenever you go out and order or procure plants. But keep in mind that you can really plug and pull from these pre-made designs. You don't have to follow it exactly to a T. If there's too many plants, you're always able to take a few out and really just take your time with being creative, getting community input, and curating the space for the way it would fit your community. Nothing's a one size fits all, and it takes time, but it's so worth it to revitalize a space in this way, and getting a great team together that's dedicated to it pays off. Some additional resources that I wanted to share for green revitalization, for revitalizing your vacant lot, for your project site. I already mentioned the St. Louis Vacancy Collaborative Small Grants for Greening Vacant Lots program, which is currently open. There is also the Brightside St. Louis Neighbors Naturescaping Grant. I believe that opens in May. I will have to double check on that. And they award in September, and they give people plants and tools for a fall project. That can be for anything that's community-based. It does not have to be a vacant lot. It could be a community garden. It can be on existing projects that already have stuff going on. So it's a great resource for people who already have a project going on, but just need a little bit more supplies or plants to help kind of support it further. If you have a community space, such as an area that's outside of a church or a school or let's say a city hall, the Missouri Department of Conservation also has Community Conservation Cost Share Program. This is a reimbursement-based program with the potential for upfront funding depending on the project. And that's something that is starting up again July 1st of 2025. So be on, keep that on your radar. You're able to reach out to me or any of our team members if you have any further questions about that, or if you need assistance curating kind of a project proposal. But it's always a great way to keep in mind that this is an additional resource we have. As far as acquiring some plants or trees, the Missouri Wildflower Nursery is great. There's also some local nurseries like Pure Air Natives. There's a few other ones like that in the St. Louis region that sell native plants. Either seed or forbs, kind of the seedlings and the little bulbs. And then Forest Relief of Missouri, they are a great partner of ours. They are also a partner to the Vacancy Collaborative Small Grants Program. They provide free native trees and woody shrubs to community projects through their program. So if you go on their website, you are able to kind of put things in your shopping cart of what they have in stock in the nursery, and you can go to their nursery in Creve Court and pick those up and bring them to your project site. That's specifically free for community projects. Now, I'll leave you with this quote. There is no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. And if there's one thing I hope that you take away from this presentation is hopefulness. Hopefulness that when things are done in community, when instead of one person bearing the load, there are many people bearing the load, that anything is achievable. It just takes time, perseverance, and a willingness to learn and grow. Thank you.